Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Peter Robinson and this is the Ethereum Engineering Group meetup. Today, I've got Adibanga, who is going to talk about Paymaster contracts. So Adibanga, why don't you introduce yourself a bit first and then please present your slides.
So hi everybody, I'm called Adibanga. Most people call me Ben also, but that's my real name. I'm a blockchain consultant for the last 4 to 5 years. I've side by side worked within blockchain companies at the same time done freelancing and blockchain consultancy. Currently, I'm working on a project where they're trying to tokenize carbon emissions. It's coming out of Stuttgart. So we have a soul-bound token with it. We also have an ERC20 token, and we're talking about the governance token. And my specialization is account abstraction, which is why I'm here today.
Sounds awesome. So please present your slides.
So can everyone hear me properly?
Yep, you're coming in loud and clear. Yeah.
Okay. Can everyone see my slides?
Loading, and yes.
Okay, so I'd like to welcome everyone to this discussion about Paymaster smart contract, and it's just an introduction. It's not an easy topic to cover in a very short period of time for the simple reason that within the greater context of the ERC 4337 protocol, the Paymaster sits within it. So it sounds more practical and it sounds better if you discuss different aspects of the ERC 4337, looking at the user operations, looking at the bundlers, looking at the aggregate smart contracts, the entry points, and then include the Paymaster. However, as you probably could guess, that's quite an extended conversation. ERC 4337 took the better part of 6-7 years. So this is a very high level view, and I'm going to just focus on some specific aspects of the Paymaster smart contract. So I'm going to focus on why there's a need for Paymaster smart contract, just some use cases, and a direct implementation by Visa, which is two Paymaster smart contracts. So first of all, why is there the need for Paymaster's smart contract? Most of us will probably have experience or be aware of some of the challenge of gas transactions. In terms of account abstraction itself, it sits nicely under gas abstraction. Some should argue it's under private key management, but that's a debate for another day. And just 3 main reasons why we have a need for Paymaster smart contracts. In terms of your wallets, you always have to pay for gas. So any operation on top of the blockchain, especially Ethereum blockchain, on-chain, requires some kind of payment. There are individuals who are touting blockchains out there that you don't need to pay for gas, but they're far and few in between. And the question is, do you really not pay, or are you just transferring that responsibility to someone else? And if you're actually paying, you're restricted to payment from a wallet, which means you need to have a possession of a wallet or externally owned account. I'm making a distinction between wallets in this case as a smart contract wallet, like an Ambaya, like a Gelato, like a Safe, as the case might be, and externally owned accounts as a MetaMask. So the distinction between a smart contract wallet, which has extra functionality, and just your day-to-day wallet, like a MetaMask. So that's one reason why the discussion about Paymaster came up. Another reason why the discussion about Paymaster also came up was the need for new users to have tokens. So take, for example, I have just applied to ETH Paris, a global event. I want to attend the hackathon, and the requirement to apply to ETH Paris, you have to deposit 0.005 ETH. That's the requirement. So that means as a new user would need to go and get a wallet, the MetaMask, the Ambaya, Gelato, Banana, as the case might be. I would need to find a way to get the ETH. I would need to find a way to send the ETH. onto the blockchain and get it confirmed, get that transaction confirmed. So this is a growing demand for new users to need tokens, whether it's Matic, whether it's on the Polygon or so as the case might be. And it's challenging, especially if you're new to the blockchain, because to use a wallet is quite complicated within itself. And then to acquire tokens is not an easy process. So that's another challenge. And that's another reason why the Paymaster smart contract discussion started. Also, in terms of the wallet UX and the UI itself. So just at the operational level, you got to implement a seed phrase, you got to have a private key, you got to sign the transaction, and then you send this transaction. So this can be quite complicated. There can be a lot of things that could go wrong at this stage. There are wallets that have tried to remove that functionality or simplify it, but still you have to have the level of involvement. Bear in mind, there are other challenges that gas transactions and the need for the Paymaster smart contract to come up. There are other reasons, but these are just three broad reasons. So the big question is, can we delegate, transfer, or sponsor gas payments? If I, for example, don't want to make the gas payment, I want to give that responsibility to another wallet, to another smart contract, as the case might be, can that be a possibility if I'm having difficulties with it? And in terms of that question, gas abstraction is the key. Now, bear in mind, gas abstraction means different things to different people. So I would stay consistent with gas abstraction in this case is transferring the responsibility or the sponsorship of a gas payment to another entity. It could be a smart contract, it could be a wallet, it could be even a non-blockchain entity, but you're transferring that responsibility to another entity. So these are just some use cases that would require implementing the Paymaster smart contract, why discussion came up. I've already touched on how, for example, many more events today, many more operations, many more products and services are requiring individuals to have some form of native token or some kind of Ethereum to perform certain kind of on-chain actions. And it can be quite difficult for new users because the onboarding process is not smooth. The UX UI interface, especially within Web3, is not at the place where we want it to be. Another reason is you could potentially have a decentralized application you've built. You want to incentivize new users to come on board. You don't want them to pay for gas. They could be established users, they could be new users. So you want to transfer that responsibility, that sponsorship to someone else. So that's another use case for it. You also have the case where you might want to allow people to use the native token. So it could be USDC or Tezos, as the case might be, like a Matic. And that's responsibility of paying for that gas transaction. You might want to sponsor it yourself, or you might want to transfer it to another smart contract, another third case entity. The last use case is something that is quite close to home. So individuals might want to use a mixer, as the case might be, and they might want to deposit some kind of tokens or funds into a mixer. And then they want to charge the gas transaction to another address. So take, for example, a situation like war. You may not want individuals to know your political affiliations. So you might want to support a certain group to make a sponsorship for certain individuals. If the political affiliations in this case might create difficulties for you from a professional perspective, you might want to obscure it. So that's where Paymaster smart contract can perform that responsibility. Now, bear in mind, these are just 4 broad use cases. There are many, many use cases that are coming up, and there will be many, many use cases as we go into the future. So the key question is, what is a Paymaster smart contract? We have touched on it in the course of the discussion. A Paymaster smart contract is a smart contract that's just facilitating some kind of transaction, sponsorship, is transferring the responsibility to a third-party mechanism to pay for the transaction. The Paymaster smart contract itself is not making the payment for the gas transaction. It's transferring. There are cases where it might make it, but in the general context of ERC 4337, where the evolution of the Paymaster came out, it's not making it, it's just transferring that mechanism. So it's kind of enabling the mechanisms, acting as an intermediary. And when we look at the discussion of Visa and how Visa was able to implement their paymasters, you see why the word intermediary will be more important for paymaster. So it just facilitates the transaction itself. Now, this is a diagram that we're going to take some time to look at, and I would explain certain features within the diagram itself. If you're quite conversant with ERC 4337, you would recognize some of the features, but if you're not conversant, we can talk about them. So within the greater context of account abstraction ERC 4337, the bundler account is a node that groups a set of user operations together. User operations are just transactions in the bigger sense of the scheme of things, but during the authorship of ERC 4337, they decided not to call them transactions so as not to confuse them with the greater word of transaction on the Ethereum blockchain. So it could be a block builder itself. There's discussion that some bundlers will become block builders and some builders will become bundlers, but maybe not vice versa. So there may be bundlers that may not be block builders. So, but it has the ability to group a batch of transactions into one single transaction. So that's what the bundler does. The entry point smart contract is a smart contract that executes and validates the single transaction from the bundler itself. So it sits in a very centralized position. For those who are interested in security, this is quite critical because there's potentially going to be any attack, more than likely to be within the entry point smart contract. So it verifies signatures, it verifies the paymaster stake. It also calls in the paymaster and it executes the final operation itself. You've noticed the word verify paymaster stake, and you can see the entry point will be making calls to the paymaster. One of the features of the paymaster is that for it to have that responsibility of sponsoring transactions, it will need to make a stake. So it will stake an amount that is specified within the bundler transaction specification to the entry point. The entry point will confirm this stake, and then based on that, it will verify and validate the operations, and then the bundler will make the payments, not the paymaster. The bundler makes the payments. It sponsors, it pays for the gas transactions, but the paymaster facilitates the process. And the entry point has to verify and validate it with the paymaster. There's a minimum amount that it wants to validate, and there's a minimum time period where it needs to validate the stake. One interesting thing about this stake is that the stake itself will not be slashed, unlike staking your delegated proof of stake or the proof of stake. It doesn't get slashed. If there's difficulties with the stake, or if there's deception within the stake, the paymaster can get throttled or banned for a period of time, not indefinitely. And then after a period of time, it can be allowed back into the ecosystem. If you see further down at the bottom of the diagram, you see the wallet contract. Within the context of account abstraction on Ethereum, you need to have an ERC 4337 wallet that is compliant. So what that simply means is that it's able to use the different components of ERC 4337, and it can send user operations, and it can validate operations within it. Now, many wallets out there are not compliant with ERC 4337. Interestingly, just this morning, Safe released a news announcement that they are now compliant. So Safe is now compliant. So you have Sol Wallet, you have Candid, you have Unipass, but your Argent, your Bravo, your Ambaya, your Gelato are not ERC 437. What that means in terms of our discussion here is that you would not be able to implement a paymaster with those particular wallets. But you have some wallets you can. The entry point would work very closely with the wallets, the smart contract wallet. It will validate the user operations itself to confirm these operations. It will check with the paymaster that it has enough ETH or whatever token to pay for the transaction. It's actually willing to pay for the transaction itself or to sponsor the transaction. So not pay for transaction, to sponsor the transaction. And then it will now validate the final process. And then that gas transaction can be deferred to another smart contract, and then it can make the gas transaction payments on your behalf. So this is a very high level view of just the flow itself. Now, this is another little bit of in-depth view, which I liked, and it kind of brought a little bit home. So you can see some of the similar methods and functions within the initial diagram itself. So the handle operations function is going to sit right within the entry smart contract. This is the one that executes and validates all the other operations that are coming from the bundle list once they're approved. The validate paymaster operations will be a call, and it has to be called because it needs to confirm, does it have enough stake? If it doesn't have enough stake, it will revert. And one challenge that is going to occur in terms of the bigger context of using a paymaster is you got to have a simulation period of the transaction and then an execution of the transaction. One of the challenges we have to do on the gas transaction ecosystem is you may send a transaction, you cannot simulate it, the transaction is gone, you've already paid for the gas transaction. If you don't send enough gas, it reverts, it fails as the case might be, and then your ETH or your token has gone. So the paymaster and the whole ecosystem is trying to introduce a way where you can simulate the transaction to check, does it have enough ETH, first of all? You can make that call. Once that call is made from the entry point to the paymaster, then there'll be a final execution. Now, one interesting aspect is sometimes there's disparity between the simulation and the execution because the user operation from the smart contract wallet may decide at some point, I'm not going to authorize that particular user operation. So it might pass through simulation stage to the paymaster. Okay, yes, we're going to sponsor this transaction, the user operation, the entry point says, okay, that's fine. But then during the actual execution, the user operation may decide, no, I'm not going to validate the op. So there's an operation, there's a method called the post op, which would hold the paymaster to responsibility. If he decides, it either holds the paymaster to responsibility, or if there's no paymaster, in some instances, we just revert back to the smart contract wallet. So to make a first call to confirm, and then if not, then we make a second call to the post op to make sure that it gets sponsorship and the payment for the gas transaction. Now, potentially, this can be a security flaw because we can have a lot of DOS attacks through there, where there can be a lot of calls going through and there can be disparity between simulation and execution. So the paymaster will have to be whitelisted, and you can set it up at some point in time. Paymasters that have failed continuous validations and continuous executions can be banned and throttled. And this will sit under a system called the proof of reputation. So they build up a reputation at some point in time. So if you wanted to make a payment and you wanted to use the paymaster as a sponsorship, you can go out there and use established paymasters that have built up a reputation as a period of time, and they've built up their validation system, as opposed to you constantly making these payments and then losing the gas transaction payments because the validation from the paymaster doesn't go through. So that's a little bit of a diagram and a high level view. Now, these are just some definitions.
Yeah, I could bring.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, there's some questions in the chat, but maybe it might be a good time to have a quick look. And whilst you've got those diagrams there and everyone's thinking about the diagrams, maybe is that okay?
Yes, fantastic. Okay. So I'm going through the questions. Okay. So it says, first question is, what happens when one of the user op fails or is invalid inside a bundled transaction? That's a very good question. Now, the user op will need to be validated before it actually goes into the bundle. So it doesn't go into the alt mem pool. So it only goes into the alt mem pool which is different from your generic mempool when it's validated. If it's not validated and it's not authorized, it wouldn't even go into the mempool. So in terms of that first question, it wouldn't even go into the bonded transaction. It is only validated transactions that batch transaction into one single transaction. Okay. Did I answer that first question?
I think so. So I guess that means that alt mempool is an off-chain mempool, not something that's on-chain.
Yes, correct. This next question says, does the transaction fail or accept the remaining valid user operations? So that refers back also to the first part. The user, there's a function within the smart contract wallet itself, sitting within the user, which is called validate operation. So it would need to be validated, and the entry point would ensure it's being validated. There's a validation stage and there's an execution stage. The validation stage will ensure that all user operation transactions are validated before they go into the bonder, so that we don't have the situation where things are going into the bonder and they're not approved. So in terms of the second question, the transaction would not even go into the bonder in the first case. It would just simply fail and revert. And that would be through the simulation stage, which means you wouldn't need to waste any of your gas transaction payment. It's just a simulation at this point in time. It's not an execution. Does that answer the second question?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. We can have enough time if there's more clarity.
Yeah. So
next question is the S.
Oh, no, don't worry.
Sorry.
Keep on going. Yeah, please go ahead.
The next question says, is the executor as a node in Ethereum? Yes. The executor is just a pseudonym in this case for a block builder. So it's a bundler and it's a node which has the responsibility of batching transactions. There are discussions in the greater context of if all validators will make the transition down to becoming bundlers, or vice versa, or would we have a new ecosystem of bundlers and validators? And there is discussions about BEV, bundler extractable value at this point in time. So it is a node in Ethereum. Can anyone create and deploy a Paymaster contract? Yes, anybody can. ZK Sync has set up a beautiful tutorial where you can go in and build your own Paymaster to your own specifications. However, be aware that to get to the level of specifications where the simulation and the execution, and also for it to able to work with the entry point, is not very easy. So there are companies out there, firms out there that are building established Paymasters. Infinitism has some. StackUp also has an API. Paymaster can just plug and play into that. So you can use that as opposed to building, but you can't build your own Paymaster smart contract, which Visa did. The next question is, does newly created Paymaster need to be registered with all the bundlers supporting 40-7 user operations, or will it work without notifying any bundler given Paymaster have already stated an entry point? Very good question. The bundler specifications, the entry point and the bundler specifications work together to whitelist Paymasters. So they're whitelisted. So the bundler specification, which also becomes its own ecosystem, would specify and whitelist the Paymasters. And then if you've got to create a Paymaster, it needs to be in line with the specifications of that particular bundler specification itself. But it doesn't mean you just need to look for a bundler that meets that standard specification. Next question is, how many Paymasters are deployed to now on Ethereum? Very good question. I couldn't give you a specific number. I know Infinitism has deployed Paymasters. StackUp has a plug and play Paymaster. Flimco also has a Paymaster out there. ZK Sync has Paymaster, and because ZK Sync has native account abstraction incorporated into the protocol itself, you can set up the account directly as a Paymaster with this functionality. So these four particular companies I know are in the forefront of setting up paymasters, but I couldn't give you a definitive number. But you can defer to one of these particular startups and use their paymasters this point in time. This question says, how much does Paymaster need to stake? Example on Ethereum. It varies. It varies from platform to platform. So the Paymaster's minimum value that they need to stake will be stated in the bundler specification. So Infinitism would stake a different amount to Pimco, which will stake a different amount to StackUp. But it's dependent. But it's a reasonable amount. It's a very reasonable amount of stake. It's not, don't worry, you don't need to put all your ETH. This question says, just to say, ZK Sync paymasters are not 43 compliant, but it's better in some ways. Well, the account abstraction is implemented directly into the ZK Sync protocol. So they're not 43 self-compliant, but they do have some of the features in line with ERC 4337, which means they can simulate the paymasters ERC 437. So they didn't directly take the ERC 437 compliancy protocol onto ZK Sync. So it is true they're not compliant directly, but they can be used in the same context. The functionality is almost close. I think that's
I think it is. And thank you for answering all those questions. I didn't mean to sidetrack it quite that much. So please continue with your talk.
Okay. So these are just some definitions, which I think helps us give a context of the general overflow of the Paymaster smart contract. Like I mentioned earlier, because the Paymaster sits within ERC 4337, it's not an easy conversational discussion just to talk about the Paymaster. We'll talk about the involvement of the bundler and the entry point smart contract, and even the aggregate smart contract at some point. But these are the core functions or methodology if you wanted to build your smart contract or within your ecosystem. So you've got to have a user operation. A user operation is just a struct itself. So it's no different to your standard struct where you can have core data or none, so different kind of features within the struct itself. However, it has an extension of other fields that you can call. So maximum gas, minimum gas, you can have that within there, within the struct itself. But in the bigger scheme of things, user operation is technically a transaction. Just that for ERC 437, they decided not to call it a transaction. It's also a struct in itself. So all the features and all the different kind of usage of the struct, you can use the user operation for. Entry point I was spoken about is the execution and validations smart contract. And it has a responsibility of making sure that the final single transaction that is bundled is approved and validated. It's very active within the ecosystem. It calls into the Paymaster, it calls into your smart contract wallet, and it also has a very direct connection talking to the bundler. The bundler, as you said, is a node that handles user up. It may be a block builder, as I've highlighted in some cases, which means it may be backing transactions. In some cases, it may not be a block builder. It may just be a node that just wants to send just single user operations itself. The validate up sits on the smart contract wallet, and they're specified by the user up sender. So this is to ensure that the initial user operations that are going out are validated within the simulation stage so that you don't start to waste gas payment when it comes to the execution stage. The validate Paymaster up sits within the Paymaster to ensure that it has enough to sponsor those transactions and to ensure that it's willing to sponsor the transactions when it's called. And then the handle up will start to execute the user operations, and the execute up helps track how much gas we use in the wallet. So if you're unsure of how much gas you're going to use within your smart contract wallet, this particular function will sit within your smart contract wallet so that you can make an informed judgment either to send the user up transaction or not, as opposed to the situation where we have today where sometimes you cannot make an informed guess. So at this point, this is what Visa did. And I decided not to try and talk about it too much, but just to look at the diagram because I felt it was kind of self-explanatory. They set up one Paymaster smart contract where you can use your ERC20 token on one end, and then you can have some kind of other payment on the other end. So it is almost no different to you traveling to a foreign country. You're in China, you're in Argentina, you only have pounds in your account, but you want to pay for things in the local currency. And the banks already have a system where they can do the conversion. So you're not going to take your pounds and then transfer your pounds into, you can, but once you just use your card, it just does it automatically. So this whole flow here is looking at that process where the client or clientele can come out, they can pay, in this case, a USDC, they can pay, of course, as an extension, a long-term in Tezos or any other kind of token, and the Paymaster will be the intermediary on the other side to ensure that either ETH is going through as transaction fees, or in the long term, it could be another token as transaction fees. And then that transaction will go into the blockchain and it goes through smooth. And you receive your 100 USDC in the final process. So this was the first Paymaster smart contract they did. They also did this other one where you're just sponsoring in this case. So this, you're just acting as a sponsorship contract. And this sponsorship had a wider range of potential tokens that it could use as a sponsorship. So that means in this case, it's looking for maybe another kind of token that is easier for you to make this transaction go through. So you've put up 100 USDC, and at the other end, the merchant receives 100 USDC. So this is the code itself. It's a bit fuzzy. I tried to make it as big as possible. This was really the functionality, the main functionality that went into the Paymaster smart contract itself. The post up calls twice. So there's a first call to ensure that it's going to be validated, and the second call to show that it's going to be executed. And the first call is just if the user up is being deceptive. And then the second call ensures that that sponsorship or that payment goes through. So somebody has to pay no matter what. That's kind of the whole idea of having two particular calls. If you just have one call, then dubious entities can just make a call, payment is simulated, but it's not executed, it doesn't go through. So they included this in their smart contract. And this was for the second one, which is the validate Paymaster. And this is sitting directly within the Paymaster smart contract itself, which is the system which is used to authorize to use the Paymaster and to check that it has enough to make the payment, and it's also willing to make the payment. So these are some resources that you can look at. Some resources, there are not a lot of resources out there on Paymaster. You can defer to the ERC 4237. It has two small sections on it. Alchemy has a really good blog on the Paymaster smart contract and the flow. You can read directly the Visa paper itself on it. And you can actually go and try it and build your own Paymaster on a ZK Sync. So have fun with it. And that's kind of the end of the presentation. So thank you very much for listening.
Yeah, well, we thank you, not you thanking us. There are some more questions in the chat. Yeah, and so if you let's see, I'm not sure if you can see, but one of them was who is responsible for choosing the Paymaster? Is it the user, the wallet, or the bundler?
Okay. The first question is there any specific reason why bundlers have different requirements? Very good question. In terms of any new ARC or ARP, individuals will try to go out and try to build the tooling. And one of the challenges we have across the industry, and a lot of us will know this, is that we sometimes have difficulty with standardization. So smart contract wallets, we have difficulty on standardization. That discussion happened at WalletCon. We have difficulty in terms of standardization across even blockchains, different standardization across bridges. So the same challenge we have with the bundler. Once ARC 437 came onto the mainnet in March, it was DEF CON. that it was announced that everybody went out there to build their own bundlers, and everybody tried to build bundlers based on their different specifications. Some built bundle on Rust, some built it in TypeScript, some built it in Python, and so on and so forth. That has led to having different requirements of the bundler. So at this point in time, you have to see which bundler suits your particular need and meets your particular organizational requirements. I hope that answers that question. Next question is, who is responsible for choosing the paymaster? So the bundler specification whitelists the paymaster. Bear in mind that the paymaster can be dubious. So as we go along in terms of implementing the paymasters, there'll be paymasters that are simulating transactions, but they're not following through the execution transactions. So during the simulation, the call goes through and the call is saying, yes, we do have enough for the cash transactions, but during the actual execution, maybe it's colluded with the user up, and that stake, and that whole stake has been initiated to be removed. So at this point in time, the bundler has responsible paymasters like whitelists that have built up a reputation on the proof of reputation over time. Remember, proof of reputation is the standard by which the paymasters are chosen, and then they kept within that. He said, is it the user, the wallet, or the bundler? It's the bundler in this case, the user. The user can specify a particular paymaster they would like to use. The user can specify a particular paymaster they would like to use. If it doesn't sit well with the bundler specification, it doesn't meet the demands of the proof of reputation, the bundler would overweight and the entry point would not approve that whitelisted paymaster. So that's the challenge, because the paymaster must meet the standards of validation and execution. And if it has a history of poor validation, in spite of the user's best demand, it wouldn't meet the standard. Next question is, does alt mempool add additional latency on top of regular transaction flow? Is there statistics numbers on that? That's a good question. This was quite an in-depth discussion. The alt mempool does not add any extra latency. It works side by side with the regular mempool itself. And also because it's off-chain, there's no increased latency. I don't know if there's any statistics numbers on that, but I'm sure as the usage increases at some point, the statistical numbers will help us see the transaction flow. I'm also hazarding a guess that there will be a bigger discussion if there's increased latency in the future. Maybe even there might be a fusion of latencies or parallel latencies. Maybe something close by having two latencies flowing side by side and just having two mempools flowing side by side and see can we have reduced latency. But at this point in time, there isn't any statistical numbers on that. Is the Bioeconomy SDK the same thing? No, the Bioeconomy SDK isn't the same thing. The Bioeconomy SDK has incorporated ARC 437 compliancy, but at this point in time, it's just an SDK. This Paymaster is a direct smart contract. So it's an actual smart contract itself. The entry point is an actual smart contract. Whereas the Bioeconomy SDK gives you some functionality of smart contract, but it's not a smart contract itself. But it isn't the same thing. There's also difficulties of using the Bioeconomy SDK at times when it's going across different chains. So at ETH Dublin, quite a few people try to use the Bioeconomy SDK, and they really struggled with using it because they struggle to go across different chains. I don't know, for some strange reason. The unit testings were having problems. How many chains is AA live on? Some chains started out being account abstracted from the very beginning, or that's the claim. So chains like Near would say from the very, very beginning, we learned from the lessons of Ethereum, and we have account abstraction incorporated into it. So there are some chains out there. I can't give you a specific number, but there are some saying that we already have account abstraction embedded into it. Definitely ZK Sync has it embedded, and StackNet have it embedded on their protocol. So all accounts, all externally owned accounts are technically contract accounts on ZK Sync and StackNet. Are people using this in all chains? No, people are not using this in all chains because not all chains are account abstraction compliant. So some are using SDKs to achieve the functionality. Some are using the wallets to achieve the functionality. Some are using smart contract wallets. Some are using ERC-437 wallet itself, but not across all chains. Is there a straightforward equivalent in Move systems like Aptos, Sui? I don't know much about the Move system itself. What I would say is that if the Move protocol itself has had account abstraction functionality into its protocol right from the very start, there will be a parallel. So it would be to look at the documentation of Move and see if it's there. Yes, there will be a straightforward equivalent where you can get the same kind of functionality. If it's not there, then you have to use the ZK sync either for the account abstraction at the protocol level or at the application level. Then you need to use the paymasters. But bear in mind, ERC-437 is at the application level. But what ZK sync I've tried to do is at the protocol level. Is it recommended to run your own bundler in building your own paymaster? No, it's not recommended to run your own bundler. Bundlers are very complicated. They can be exploited if there's a gap between the simulation and the execution stage. Remember, the simulation and the execution stage are the weak point which people might exploit, because the transaction is simulated, it has the gas transaction, but it's not executed, then there'll be a loss of gas transactions. There could also be people send a lot of gas transactions simulating that they do have the gas payment, but the execution doesn't have it. So I wouldn't recommend, from a commercial perspective, to have your own bundler, but from a personal basis, just, you want to break and build. Yes, absolutely, try to build your own bundler. This question says, who is aware about a given paymaster reputation? Very good. So the proof of reputation comes from the entry point. The entry point smart contract. The proof of reputation system is set up on the ecosystem itself. So for example, on the Infinities there, the proof of reputation is set up and they have whitelisted paymasters that have lived up to the reputation. So you can go in and you can refer to that. This question says, does it mean that account abstraction is already live in Ethereum mainnet? Yes, it was incorporated in March 1st. I think DevCon Bogota, one of them this year, it went live. But it's at the application level, not at the protocol level. There is a big debate now to push it back to the protocol level. URVice is one of the co-authors of the ERC-437, got into a heated debate with a few. There's a new group pushing. So it's at the application level at this point in time, which means you still need a wallet that is ERC-437 compliant to get the benefits of it. Just are waiting for people to create bundlers, entry point contract, paymaster contracts. Yes, it's a growing ecosystem, correct? A growing ecosystem. Is it necessary to make paymaster decentralized? It's already decentralized. The paymaster is already decentralized. It's just a smart contract sitting on the Ethereum mainnet. So as long as Ethereum remains decentralized, the paymaster is decentralized. Or can it have off-chain service? At this point in time, no, it can't have off-chain service because it's a smart contract. It's not a layer 2 scanning solution. It can defer potentially to an off-chain service, which is what Visa did to their general payment system. It can defer to off-chain service, but the paymaster is just a smart contract that sits on the Ethereum mainnet, like any other smart contract. It just has a fancy name. I think that's all the questions there. I don't know if you have enough time. I'm happy to try and take any more questions.
I think there's one more that's just come through from Pawa.
Okay. Before submitting a sponsored user app, do users also need to have a deposit on their account? Very good question. They do not need to have a deposit on their account. This is the whole idea of having the paymaster. You can decide to use a paymaster, which would then defer that responsibility of the transactions, or you can have a deposit. So the whole concept of the paymaster is you don't need to have a deposit. And that's the whole concept. So when an operation is submitted by them with incorrect information about the paymaster, is compensated for the work done by the bundler. Yes. Somebody has to pay. The key question is somebody has to pay. And there's a ding-dong fight between the bundler and the paymaster. And it's almost like who can get out of it? The bundler is trying to hold the paymaster accountable through the entry point smart contract, and paymaster vice versa. So there will be dubious people in the future who will try to push the responsibility always back at the simulation stage to the bundler, not the execution stage, at the simulation stage, that we have enough here. The bundler thinks, okay, yes, it does have enough. The bundler makes the payment, it doesn't have enough. So there's a kind of verification system in place where the paymaster can be held accountable and the bundler can also be held accountable. And the entry point holds that responsibility of making sure. That's why there's a validation stage and there's an execution stage. I think I
might jump in as well.
Yes.
Switch it up a bit with the questions.
Yeah.
Thank you, Adegbenga. It's a super interesting talk. So I'm curious, so how does the entry point decide which, say there's multiple paymasters, how does it decide which paymaster to try and call for the tokens in like the fee?
So through the whitelisted paymasters, so there'll be a series of whitelisted paymasters. The whitelisted paymasters, then the user will pick from the whitelisted paymasters their preferred paymaster.
Right. So the user
the
has
entry
to be
point,
aware of the paymasters.
Yes.
Right.
But they've got to be whitelisted.
Right. Okay. And so the second point, you mentioned stake as well, but there's also no slashing for the stake. Could you talk a bit more what the point of the stake is?
So the point of the stake was when ERC 4337 was being written, one of the discussions was, what if we have a situation where at the simulation stage, the paymaster has agreed to sponsor the transactions, but the execution stage now refuses? How do you hold it accountable? And how do you move away from that problem? So the stake is the way to hold the paymaster accountable for a period of time, so that if at the simulation stage it agrees to make to sponsor the gas transactions, then it doesn't make, then it kind of renegades on it at the execution stage. Somebody still makes that gas payment. So you as a user, you still get your gas transaction going through. That's the whole idea.
Right. Okay. And this simulation, is it done on chain or off chain?
It's done on chain.
Right. So this, okay. Interesting. Okay. Thank you.
So the simulation are just calls. So the simulation are just calls back to different functions itself. So just as you make your standard call to a smart contract, project smart contract, video smart contract, they just called. The simulation is just a fanciful word for it, as opposed to before you make the payments. So a call will go out, confirmation, okay, now execution. Call will go out, confirmation, okay, now execution.
Right. Okay. And you said those calls are off chain or on chain? I just missed that.
On chain.
On chain. Okay. All right. That's interesting. I'll think about that.
So does that mean then you use twice as much gas as you otherwise would because you execute the same thing twice?
Yeah. This is the discussion. The discussion is, would you use more gas? With the current system now, what they calculated was you still spend more gas missing out for a transaction you've sent, as opposed to these double calls. So one of the discussion that came up was, I'm at risk now of paying for a transaction that could be rejected, could be reverted, as the case might be, and I lose so much gas transaction from it, so I just lose the whole gas payment, as opposed to a bit more minimized gas payments going out for the initial calls and then the execution calls. So it's still lesser than what you would have for losing your gas transaction if it gets reverted, if your transaction is not approved.
Yeah.
So there's a bit more questions in here. Let me go through. Okay. Can anyone want open source bundler? Yes, yes. There are open source bundlers you can contribute to at this point in time. I think definitely Plimco definitely has an open source bundler that you can look into. Can you please point to the bundler specs where spec requirements are specified? I'll have to check that information out. I can definitely send it into the slides at a later point. The last time I checked, this was on the general GitHub. So if you go to Plimco's GitHub and Infinitive's GitHub, then the stack requirements are specified. This one says on-chain calls don't require gas. Is that a statement or a question?
I don't know. So if you were within a transaction and did a view call, it would still cost gas. But maybe what they're saying is if you did a view call, if you did a transaction but did it as a call, it wouldn't cost gas, because even though you're doing all the state updates, you're guesstimating gas, but that would be a way of doing it. But if you're doing it as part of a real transaction, it would cost gas. So
yes, correct. Yes, correct.
yeah.
Because there's a distinction between the execution and the simulation. So the execution is really where the gas cost is really held accountable. But at the simulation stage, there are some times where there's a gas cost. There are some times where there's a gas cost. But there's discussions about minimized gas costs at the simulation stage compared to what we have today. Says, I see simulate calls as static. Does having static methods is, I see. I see simulate calls as static. Does having static method in this, I can't understand the last point. I see simulate calls as static. Does having static method in Solidity code don't require?
No, I think once you're within a transaction, so I think that's talking about a static method call versus say delegate call or just plain call. But it's still, if that's within a transaction and between two contracts, it's still going to cost gas. So
yeah. So sorry. So what I was saying in this is that I see that in the entry point contract or the smart wallet contract, there are methods called simulate, validate, user operations. So those methods with simulate in the name, I guess those methods are being called by the bundler before passing the user operation to the entry point. So those methods are static. Those methods are static in the smart contract. So I'm just asking that, is it making static doesn't require to pay gas fee, or why does bundler is able to call a method on chain without paying gas?
I would have to look further into that. I have to look further into that. My understanding is the simulation calls itself, either are either a minimized gas cost or gasless. Because there's quite a few calls in simulation from the entry point, from the bundler back and forth, from the Paymaster smart contract itself. And the whole idea is to have a minimized gas transaction cost compared to your standard gas transaction cost, where if you send the transaction, it gets reverted or it gets rejected, as the case might be. So I would have to just look a little bit more into that. I can definitely get back to Peter on that, a little bit more into that.
So this will be on YouTube. And so what you can do is, so the slides and the video will be on YouTube, and you can put a comment in the video on YouTube. So yeah, so thank you. So look, I think we've had a whole heap of questions, and I can see that we're heading towards 6 o'clock. If you were to represent your slides and we go through those last 3 slides, just so people know what's coming up.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah, no, not to worry. Things have changed ever so slightly in the last week or so. Yeah, and we go to the next slide. Next slide. Yep. Okay. All right. Future talks. So on July 26th, which is just next week, we've got Jaden Windle talking about ERC 6551. And then on August 9, we were going to have a talk about Passport, but I've pushed that out by about a month. And instead, I'm going to talk about how at Immutable we go from a smart design of a smart contract, or the concept, to a deployed contract, and we're maintaining it. So the huge process behind having a secure blockchain system and what we're doing, how we do that. Then on August 23, Philip is going to talk about his ideas on bridge aggregation and how that should work. We've got Christian talking about Forge development. We've got Clemens, who's going to be talking about Web3 and AI. And so here's a speaker from Consensus. And then I'm going to get around to talking about Passport and the whole immutable ZK EVM architecture, but in particular, talk about how Passport works and give a demo and explain why this smart contract system is secure and yeah, why it's a good idea. So look, there's one more slide which talks about the socials. Anyway, if this talk is going to be uploaded to YouTube, and if you're watching this on YouTube, there's a meetup.com group called the Ethereum Engineering Group. There's also a Slack workspace. If you go to meetup.com, you can get the invitation link for the Slack. Yep, there it is, just there. Example code for some of the talks is on that GitHub repo. So look, Adegbenga, thank you again for your talk. Very interesting and very topical. So thank you for your talk, and have a great rest of ETHCC.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you. All
Thank
right.
you.
Thank
Thanks
you.
a lot.
Bye.
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 Bye.